Alright, so we are now as far away from this piece of film that I'm going to show bits from as the film itself was from the actual World's Fair of 1904. Now, around the turn of the 1900s, video film starts to become a thing, and the film will actually talk about people seeing the technology of movies for the first time at the World's Fair, as a lot of new technology was first seen at these fairs. We see the American Gas Institute looking very old world.
St. Louis in 1900 was a leisurely Midwestern city undisturbed by vulgar, large ambitions. But in these pleasant homes, there were men determined to make it something else. To make it, for one summer at least, the center of the civilized world.
From Paris, which we have very early film footage of, there's also quite a lot from St. Louis in 1904. It's an interesting point of history for the straight up historians and for the people who think that history is basically bunk, as Henry Ford said.
In August of 1901, the financial barriers were down, and it was then that President McKinley issued an official proclamation.
$20 million all in, raised from various sources to build the fair, we're told. That was when $20 million used to go a long way. In fact, this was the largest fair ever built, we're told, and the construction time given as 3 years, a whole year more than Chicago. They had to work on this. At 8 minutes we get some construction shots, and then 9 minutes 30 we get this little nugget.
But of course they weren't built to last. There was a framework of yellow leaf pine, and over that we put a mixture of plaster and burlap called staff. The columns and the heavy ornaments were made out of plaster of Paris, and in that one building we used over 4,000 tons of it and about 7 million feet of lumber.
So just talking about the whole endeavour as if it was no thing there. It was easy to do. It was easy for these people. Of course they would have had early power tools by this time. Power tools invented around 1894, I believe. The film also says people would pack a lunch and go and sit by the construction site and see how the fair was getting on. And I'm sure Eric Larson says the exact same thing in pretty much the exact same words in his book about the 1893 fair. And I'm wondering if he watched this film as well. Although obviously it's not the same fair, it's 10 years apart. Just seems like the same narrative. 11 minutes 40 we get some views of the site plus sketches for the design of the fair.
Exactly 1 year later, the fair was ready to open. This is the area where the zoo is now. From this area, it spread for 2 miles to the west. It included the zoo, the boathouse and lake, and the art museum, which was built for the fair.
Over 1,500 buildings, we're told. Also included 2 golf courses. And we often see golf courses built near sites that have ancient historical stuff on, and I'm not really sure why.
While down in their basements, local inventors were building everything from a dirigible to a mechanical man.
12 minutes 45 we get an airship, and in 14 minutes we get finally the opening address to the fair given by Reverend Gonzalez of Chicago, presumably passing the torch from the Chicago Fair 10 years earlier, symbolically there. And at 14.5 minutes, the senator who spoke at the opening of the fair was a Burnham. I think probably Henry Burnham, who was a US senator at that time. Is the only one I could find who fits the bill. However, the Senator Burnham pictured in Wikipedia is a different man than the one who appears in the video, so I'm not really sure. It's not Daniel Burnham, the architect of the 1893 fair, as he was never a senator. In 1904, Burnham was in the Philippines, we're told, building in Manila and another city whose name I can't pronounce, which he seems to have delegated to another architect named William Parsons and someone called Pierce Anderson. And I have a picture of a hospital that may have been built by them, opened in 1907 in Manila. And oh yeah, there's a railway station showing all the hallmarks of the Burnham World's Fair style, with the Phoenician shield here, the columns, and of course the whitewash paint job. And I'm not sure if this building is still standing. Some of the station has been demolished, but I think this might be still there. If anyone wants to go to the Philippines and find out, please let me know. Just one more note on the theme of the Burnhams. There's also a James Burnham who was recently spoken about on another video I just happened to be watching by chance about Cold War politics. James Burnham, we're told, was a Trotskyist intellectual and philosopher who became the founder, according to one Christopher Hitchens, of neoconservatism. He appears to have switched out his political allegiance depending on who seemed to be in the ascendancy at the time, and also appears to have been a CIA asset, and also alleged to be the inspiration for the character of O'Brien in George Orwell's 1984. Orwell was so disturbed by Burnham's vision articulated in his book The Managerial Revolution that he was compelled to go and create Big Brother, 2 Minutes Hate, Room 101 and The Fort Police as a repudiation of Burnham's envisioned managerial hell of a future. And Wikipedia will tell us James was the son of an Englishman, but he did also happen to be from Chicago, so who knows. At 15 minutes we get top hats, more views of the fair. Waterways seem to have been very important at the early World's Fairs. Chicago, of course, had a similar boating lake in the middle of the central court of honour, and canal boats. People even seem to have come to the fairs in paddle steamers in large numbers. A very Disneyland feel to this production, and apparently Walt actually got the idea for Disneyland from his dad, who worked on building some of these World's Fairs. And at 16 minutes, a not at all temporary looking building here.
What the hell are you?
I'm not sure what this is, but very weathered looking and hard to say. All of this was temporary, don't forget, and 58 years later, when this documentary was made, it was still within living memory, so we assume that people would have remembered this stuff being built, although we get very little in the way of actual interviews, other than the little bit with the Irishman, who appears to be an actor and a lady later on, which we'll come to. 18 minutes we get into the history of early motion pictures. There are no moving pictures from 1893, don't forget.
I was working for the Multiscope and Biograph Company, and I had hired a boat to try to make a shot under the DeSoto Bridge. I had tied the camera down to the floor of the boat so it wouldn't move, and as I went under, I framed to the left so I could get a statue they called a cowboy at rest. This was very popular, and there was a lot of controversy about whether a cowboy should lie down or should he be squatting.
22 minutes we get fountains, steam powered or electric perhaps. We know there was electric power at this fair, as at Chicago of course, which probably even in 1904 would have been the first time some people would have seen electric power. The fair had parades every day, we are told, and buildings dedicated to 34 different nations. 26 minutes we get marching army regiments, lest we forget what a martial society this was, and in many ways militaristic. Same as today, some people would say. But even so, it seems to have been more acknowledged and in your face back then. And on 29 minutes we get this lady who saw the fair firsthand, around 70 years old at the time of this interview I think, and what she mainly recalls, amongst other things, is ice cream cones and electric lights. And she describes the food being handed out for free if you went at the right time. People less obsessed with money in those days perhaps, although the fair was still a money maker. And they brought savage tribes from the Philippines. As we know, World's Fair architect Daniel Burnham was busy developing the Philippines at this time, so an interesting connection there. And Patagonian giants, but no photos of them in the film, unfortunately. And hard to say how big they actually were, but they look pretty normal sized in this photo. 36 minutes we get this interesting statement, and I wonder if this is in some way what these World's Fairs were intended to do.
When President McKinley announced his support of the fair, he said, among other things, that expositions are the timekeepers of progress. Well, if the Louisiana Purchase Exposition had any central unifying purpose, it was certainly that, to show the world what mankind was doing. To this end, the directors assembled more people and inventions and things and products than had ever been assembled before. Virtually every nation in the world and every state in the Union was represented displaying its wares. There was so much here that Mr. Francis once remarked that if all the rest of mankind were blotted out, there would be enough here in the exhibits at the St. Louis Louisiana Purchase Exposition to reestablish the standards of civilization.
37 minutes we get the Ferris Wheel with this enormous central axle here. Is that the right word for it? And yes, it is the original one from the Chicago Fair that was rebuilt. And I need to do a video on this thing in itself. There's a lot here. Just to note, on 37.5 minutes we get airships again, and on 38 trams, of course. Pretty widespread at this time. Someone's screaming outside my window. Why is someone screaming? That's what I get for living in Hastings. Sorry, right. 38 minutes we get a brief shot of the wireless telegraph and tower. Lots of these radio towers going up at that time. Although it's not always acknowledged that radio transmission was their purpose. I suspect that people may have not been told what they were really for, and another video in itself really on that subject, which I have written one but not recorded yet. This one transmitted all the way to Chicago, we are told, although unclear who was receiving the messages at the other end. Perhaps Daniel Burnham and co. 38.5 minutes, we get the Portuguese sun machine, which could produce heat of 30,000 degrees. And what became of that, I have no idea. "40 minutes, we get the automobile, which would be so central to defining the 20th century. 42 minutes, we get to the pike, which was kind of the marketplace of the fair, I suppose you could say, with plenty of opportunities for the punters to come and spend their money, and clearly not a temporary building here, which begs the question, were they taking apart old buildings from Europe and shipping them in to St. Louis and rebuilding them here? Where did this come from? Was it always there? We get a very disturbing looking statue, and another one. I have no idea what this is. Perhaps the world's first ghost train. And all this made of plaster and staff, of course. 45 minutes, we get submarines, the North Pole, and a very Richardsonian Gothic looking tower. And at 46 minutes and a bit, there's a castle called Battle Abbey. Now, Battle Abbey is near Hastings, as you'll know, and possibly that was the inspiration for this. And I'd like to know more about that one. 46 minutes, we get fairground rides and an educated horse. And here's some music from the end of the film to play us out. Not really sure how to end this one, so I'm just going to leave it there. But next time we'll take a look at some footage from the Paris World's Fair. And I want to cover a few other World's Fair bits on the channel too, so do like and subscribe if you can. Thank you. I appreciate you all.
That night, Mr. Francis made his final speech. He said, "With the turn of this key, the lights of the exposition will be extinguished forever. I can only say farewell, a last farewell to all this splendor